Hi, it's Corrine. Thanks so much for stopping by. Today I'm making a 5x7 card. I'm using the gorgeous Blossoms of Encouragement from Altenew. This is their Craft Your Life project kit. So it comes with the stencil set, the die set, a large stamp with just the most beautiful sentiments on it. And this is going to be a thank you card. I am referring to the project guide that comes with the stamp set. I will actually refer to this throughout the process because it'll walk you through which layering stencil goes where, and it kind of helps you with ideas of colors. So again, it comes with that large die to cut out the large blossom on the front, which I will be using. And I did stamp this out on an 80-pound piece of Hammermill cardstock. I think it was like a 5.5 by 7 piece of cardstock, but I knew I'll be cutting that out. So here I pulled out, I used some sticker paper, the reverse side, because it keeps my sticky mat nice and clean and covered from dust. And I have a 9x12 Simon Says Stamp glass board mat with the Altenew Ultra Grip sticky mat on top. And this is magnetized, so I can use magnets as well, but really you don't need them with the sticky mat. So this layering stencil set comes with 5 different pieces. And like I said, I will heavily rely on my project sheet to just kind of show me where the stencils go. But what I find the easiest is if you're always matching up the center of the flowers when you're doing the flower part, then it's super easy to match up. And once you do it once, you pretty much know how their stencils work. I pulled out a bunch of different colors, inks from Altenew. I pulled out some Memento, Distress Oxides, and Concord and Ninth, and also Distress ink. I just went with the colors that I wanted. I didn't worry about whether they were all from the same manufacturer or the same company or not. So I'm pulling out some small blending brushes. This is going to help me get into those small areas. And I'm also using some sticky Post-it notes to kind of mark off the sections that I didn't want to get ink on. At this point when I was doing the stenciling, I wasn't sure if this was going to be an entire card front. Looking back, I went ahead and decided to cut this out because I wanted to give it a little dimension. So you really could save time by not worrying about those edges too much if you know that you're going to be cutting this out. So I wanted to do some colors that match, and I started off knowing that I wanted to do blue leaves. So what goes well with blue is orange, so I decided to do orange flowers, and yellow also goes well with them, so I did some yellow flowers with a little bit of orange as well. And I'm just using a microfiber cloth to kind of wipe off my blending brushes. And I am using different blending brushes for different products. So I'm using oxide blending brushes that I have reserved strictly for oxide inks. And then I'm using dye brushes, blending brushes for any dye inks that I use. I did stamp out on the Misty, and I left my stamp in the Misty. I stamped out my large cluster of flowers using Gina K's amalgam ink. And I chose that ink so I don't have to worry about it smearing when working with it. But if you noticed when I stamped it out, I just stamped it once. It wasn't the best impression, but I wasn't worried about it. I just needed enough impression to be able to line up my stencils because my plan is to go back and stamp it again in some dark onyx black VersaFine ink. That's my favorite, is to have a really dark black outline. So I left my stamp in the Misty knowing that that was what I was going to do. So I'm just going through doing layer by layer. I noticed the center of the flowers, I forgot a layer, but no big deal. You just go back, line it back up, and put that in. For the center of the flowers, it has a highlight area and it has a darker area. So I added some ground espresso. The ground espresso looks great with all different type of colors. It darkens the orange, it darkens blues. And again, I started this knowing that I wanted to do all my leaves blue, and I worked the rest of the card from there. So I'm quickly going through the stenciling. I'm going to speed this up quite a bit. I'm sure you've seen this a time or two. And I am trying to get the colors a little bit darker where there would be shadows. And now you see me jump here to the darkest part of the stencils. So they have like a highlight area. This is so pretty. So here's where I put it back in my MISTI. This is why I left my stamp in my MISTI to begin with. I wanted to give it a dark outline. I pulled out just from Office Depot. I've had these transparency sheets in my stash for probably 10 years. And some VersaFine Onyx Black ink. This is my go-to dark ink. And I'm stamping that down on that transparency paper first, just to make sure I have it lined up perfectly so I don't ruin all the hard work that I put into stenciling that. So I just press that down, kind of lift up the MISTI, make sure I'm happy with it, that it's lined up, remove the transparency, and then stamp it. I believe I stamped it twice just to get that really dark black outline. And then you can easily take some alcohol and some tissue or a microfiber cloth and clean off that transparency and use it for future use. So I do allow this to sit and dry. I come back to it, I believe, either the next day or a few hours later. But look how pretty that is. I love using the black ink to give it such a beautiful outline at the very end. So I go ahead and use the die cut, run it through my Anna Griffin Impress, cut the entire piece out, and I will also cut another layering piece, a couple in the end here. But at this point, I decided to have this come off the edge of my card base. So I pulled out some black cardstock. This card will end up being a 5x7 card. So I'm cutting this to 10x7. I will score it at 5 inches, leaving me with a 5x7 card. And now I'm going to set my large die in my plates only where I want it to cut. So this is partial die cutting. I want it to cut off the edge of my card, but not the rest of my card. So I'm going to get the plates exactly where I want, tape them in place, run them through my die cutting machine, and it doesn't cut to the edge of your card. So in that case, you just use, in my case, I'm using a T-square ruler and just a craft knife to finish cutting the edge of that. So that gives me my decorative edge. So now I decided I wanted it to be a trifold card, so I will be adding another piece of black cardstock to this. I'm going to give that a good crease with my bone folder, kind of lay out my die cut to see if I was happy with it. And here's where I add the other piece for a trifold. So I'm going to cut the same matching black cardstock to 7 inches high because that'll match the height of the card I have. And I cut it to 10 inches. Then I will go ahead and score it at a 1/2 inch on the long edge. So this 1/2 inch is going to be what is adhered to my card base. I'm going to miter the corners as well, just to kind of hide them a little bit once it's adhered down to my card base. taking it back to my paper trimmer, I want to cut it 5 inches, actually a little bit more than 5 inches, with that tab piece folded under. So it's a little less than 5.5 from the scored piece, but I just folded that over, took it to my trimmer and cut it a little bit more than 5 inches. This way, when it's folded, it folds nicely and there's no bulk in the middle where the card meets. So you have the option to fold it on the back side or the inside. I knew that I was going to be adding a piece of cardstock to the inside, so that's where I'm hiding my tab. So I folded it inside the card. I'll put some magnets on that and give that a little time to dry. So here I'm showing you if a little bit of the glue seeps out, you can take a glue eraser and erase it, but I knew I was covering it up, so I didn't worry about it. I pulled out my Concord and 9th cardstock swatches and was deciding which color I wanted to add to my card. I ended up going with Harbor. So this piece here is a little bit darker. I think this was, or I ended up going with Powder, I believe. I can double check that and put it in the description if you're interested in it. But I also wanted to cut out a piece to go behind my entire die cut just to give it some strength. So here's the color I decided on. I cut it to a little bit smaller than 5 by 7. That's what's going to be added to the inside of my card, which I'll stamp on that here in a little bit as well. And I did the partial die cutting for another piece to go on the front to give me a little bit of a blue border. So I did it the exact same way that I showed in the beginning. And as I was holding it here, I decided I wanted to do some 3D embossing. So I pulled out this gorgeous 3D from Spellbinders, the leaves folder. I do like to spray it with a little bit of water, especially the Concord and 9th. It's a thick cardstock. I ran that through my Spellbinders Big Shot embossing machine, and it's just the most beautiful impression. So holding it up to my card, I decided I wanted to give myself a little bit of a border. So I cut a little bit off that edge to where you can still see the black peeking out from the card base. And here's where I'm adhering that second piece I talked about earlier, where I wanted to just give it some stability. I like the little bit of dimension that it gives. And for the inside of my card, I decided to add another piece so it kind of finishes off the inside, but I used the same black cardstock so it just kind of blends in. For this inside piece, I wanted to add something to it, so I used the same large stamp, and I'm pulling out some Dove Concord and 9th. That's my go-to if I want something just kind of subtle on the inside of a card, and I'll stamp that down once. That gives me an outline of that same stamp set. So pretty. I also cut out a die cut. I wanted to stamp out the thank you, but the die cut, I didn't like the look, so I just stamped directly onto that piece, and it says thank you for all that you do. I use the Onyx Black VersaFine ink on that as well. I'm using some double-sided tape because that way I can ensure that I can get it even, that it's not crooked. If you just release or remove the release paper on the very top end, kind of move it around, get it where you want. Once you're happy with that, you can remove the release paper from the rest of it and press it down. So I pulled out some Hero Arts pigment ink in Unicorn, and my plan was to heat emboss this, but once I stamped it 3 times. I thought it looked really pretty the way it was, so I just left it. That's going to be on the inside piece that you first open up. And now I adhered down my front piece. I couldn't decide if I wanted to cut the edges off or let it go off the edge of the card. So I went ahead and traced it and took it to my large trimmer and trimmed off the edge. I'm adding some clear dewdrops. These are probably my favorite thing to use on cards because they're not super busy. They just add the perfect touch. And here's my finished trifold card. I did make 2 envelopes. I wasn't sure which looked better, the blue that goes with the blue in the leaves or a black envelope. but I used my We Are Makers envelope punch board for that. Super simple. I hope you've enjoyed today's process. If you have any questions, please leave them down in the comment section, and please consider subscribing and liking this video. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.